Chicago, late evening. The heart monitor beeped steadily, a cruel reminder that time was running out. Janiola Lawrence sat beside the hospital bed, her long fingers laced together tightly. The smell of antiseptic clung to her clothes like the weight of the past year. Unpaid bills, failed treatments, and a string of promises whispered into her father's ear as he lay unconscious. Dr. Chen cleared his throat gently, stepping in with a folder tucked beneath one arm. His face said what his words only confirmed. "We're running out of time," he said softly. "If he doesn't receive the surgery by Friday..." Janiola blinked, trying to stay upright beneath the weight of that sentence. "How much?" He hesitated. 85,000. Up front. She almost laughed. 85,000? She didn't even have 800 in her account. And yet she nodded, thanked him, and walked out of the room with quiet grace. But the moment the elevator doors closed, her composure cracked. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She pressed her palms to her face. "God, please, I don't have anyone else." That night, in her apartment, the tiny apartment felt too quiet, too cruelly normal. Stacks of bills lay on the kitchen table. A second-hand laptop glowed faintly, showing unpaid invoices, denial letters from insurance, messages from friends who didn't know what to say. She typed fundraising for urgent heart surgery into a search bar. Nothing new. She tried again. She called 2 old co-workers. No luck. By midnight, she was staring at her father's photo on the fridge, the one from before his heart gave out, before her world shrank to hospital walls and vending machine dinners. Then her phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. "I can help you. If you want your father to live, call this number within the hour." Her pulse spiked. She stared at the screen. Spam? A scam? How could anyone know? But the message didn't vanish. It sat there, pulsing like a heartbeat. She hesitated, then typed back, "Who is this?" No answer. Just 3 words a minute later. "Time is running." For half an hour she sat still, the phone in her hands, thinking about what desperation does to people. She'd seen it make honest men steal, make proud women beg, and now it was testing her. She prayed softly, whispering through tears, "Lord, I don't know who this is, but if it's from you, show me, please." When her phone buzzed again, she jumped. This time it wasn't a text. It was a call, private number. She let it ring twice before she answered. "Hello?" The voice that replied was deep, clipped, precise, the kind of tone that came from someone used to being obeyed. "Miss Lawrence," he said, "my name is Riku Katsuragi. You don't know me, but I know you, and your father's situation." Her stomach twisted. "Who told you? How do you even know about him?" "I know everything that matters," he replied, "including the fact that you need $85,000 by Friday." She froze. "Who are you?" "I'm the solution." His voice didn't sound like mercy. It sounded like an offer wrapped in danger. The next morning, Chicago. Janiola didn't sleep. She sat in the same spot all night, arms wrapped around her knees on the kitchen floor, the faint sound of the fridge humming behind her, as if it were trying to fill the silence. By dawn, she'd made a list, options she hadn't tried, loans she couldn't get, family that wouldn't help, the timeline she had left, and the man who said he could fix everything for a price. At 8:03 a.m., her phone buzzed again. "Have you decided?" She typed 2 words. "What's the catch? Everything comes with a cost, but you won't pay in blood. Only time. 12 months. She stared at the message. Then, 3 minutes later, a second text came through. "Your passport will be expedited today. Check your email. Your father's bills have been cleared. Your flight to Tokyo leaves in 36 hours. Do not be late. 24 hours. Later, O'Hare International Airport." She had kissed her father's forehead through tears, whispering things she didn't have time to explain. He was still unconscious. "Forgive me, Daddy, I'm doing this for you." At the airport, she turned and walked toward Gate 17 with a brand new suitcase, a navy blue passport she hadn't touched in years, and a quiet rage boiling just under the surface. In flight? 13 hours in the sky. The clouds outside the window were painted in soft gold. But Janiola couldn't see beauty. She was wearing worn shoes, had $100 in her purse, and was flying to a country she'd never been to sign a contract with a stranger who sounded like stone. And yet, somehow deep down, she knew. This was not just the beginning of a deal. It was the beginning of a war. She opened her email. There was one message from a Katsuragi legal assistant. Attached were a set of guidelines, a non-disclosure agreement, and a reservation code for a car that would pick her up directly from Narita International Airport. Beneath it, just one line in the body of the message: "Your presence is not optional, but what happens next depends entirely on you." She exhaled slowly and leaned her head back. The stranger had set the table. Now she had to decide who she'd be when she sat down. Japan, 2 days later. Private lounge, Katsuragi Tower. Janiola steps into a sleek, high-rise lounge, escorted by silent men in suits. Rain streaked the glass windows of the Katsuragi Tower like ink bleeding down paper. Janiola stood in the center of the private lounge, sleek, silver, soulless, wondering if she'd just walked into the mouth of a wolf. She hadn't expected him to be young, or that dangerously handsome, or so cold. He didn't rise when she entered. He simply looked up from his tablet, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're early," he said. "That's a good sign." His voice was low and sharp, like a cello string pulled too tight. "And you're Riku Katsuragi?" she asked, arms folded. "The man who claims to have my father's future in his hands?" He didn't flinch at her tone. "I don't claim. I do." She blinked. "Why me?" He leaned back, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Because you're unentangled. No scandals, no press, a clean record. You're not after status. You don't even seem to want to be here, which makes you perfect." "For what exactly?" He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, a marriage license, a medical authorization form, and a non-disclosure agreement. She stared. "This is a joke." "It's a contract," he replied smoothly. "1 year. You become my wife. Publicly. You smile. You show up at functions. You wear the ring. In return, your father receives the best medical care money can buy. Quietly. Efficiently." She looked up sharply. "No real marriage, though? No intimacy. No emotion. This is business. Nothing more." Her voice was quiet, almost bitter. "And when the year's over, we divorce. You walk away with your father alive, and a generous settlement. And what do you get?" His gaze sharpened. "I get to keep my empire." She waited, but he said no more. That was the end of the conversation, in his mind. A deal to be made or refused. No heart, no soul. Just ink and obligation. "You don't believe in love," she murmured. "No, I don't." "Why not?" His answer was instant. "Because love is a liability, and I don't collect those." Her fingers hovered over the folder. Every part of her screamed, "Don't." But then she saw her father's face, remembered the way he smiled at her graduation, the way he called her his miracle. With a shaking breath, she reached for the folder. "Fine," she said, "but remember something, Mr. Katsuragi. I may be your convenience, but I won't be your possession." He said nothing. But the flicker in his eyes, the tiniest shift, made her wonder if she'd just become more dangerous than he anticipated. A few days later, Janiola returned to the U.S. to see her father, her heart a battlefield of duty and dread. When she walked into the hospital room for the last time before leaving for Seoul, he opened his eyes, groggy but lucid. "You didn't have to come back," he murmured. She smiled faintly, brushing his graying hair back. "Yes, I did." His hand closed around hers. "You're like your mother." Something in her chest pulled tight. "What do you mean?" But he was already drifting back to sleep, and the question hung in the air like smoke. The private jet was quiet. Janiola sat quietly, her back straight, chin lifted. Outside the window, the clouds parted to reveal the endless sky. Just as she crossed the point of no return, Seoul, South Korea, Katsuragi residence. Riku stood at the window of his penthouse, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the glittering skyline. Seoul pulsed below him, cold, calculated, powerful, like him. At 31, he was the man people bowed to but never embraced. They called him the crownless prince, the dual heir, the ice beneath the empire. His Japanese mother was the eldest daughter of the Katsuragi conglomerate. His Korean father, Chairman Kang, ruled a multi-billion-dollar financial group with an iron fist. But Riku bowed to no one, not even them. He had been raised between two worlds, two languages, two cultural titans. But affection? That had never been part of his inheritance. Love was never part of the succession plan. Power was, and Riku had chosen it ruthlessly. 10 years ago, Kyoto. He was just 21 when he buried his mother. Not a single tear fell. His father hadn't attended the funeral. Instead, a fax had been sent from Kang Group headquarters stating, "The past is the past. Focus on the future." Riku had learned early that vulnerability was a currency you never showed, not even to yourself. He had watched his mother deteriorate under the pressure of both families. A Katsuragi by birth, a Kang by marriage, but never enough for either. She had died with whispered apologies on her lips. "I should have never loved him." Present day, Seoul. The assistant bowed as he entered the study. "Sir, your wife is here." Riku didn't look up from his laptop. "She's not my wife," he said quietly. "She's the contract." Still, he closed the screen. Downstairs, Janiola stepped out of the car into the cold glass foyer of the Katsuragi Kang estate. She was already overdressed, or perhaps underdressed. She couldn't tell. Her red blazer and black slacks were sharp, but she felt like a bruise walking into a museum. He was waiting by the stairwell, tall, very good-looking, unreadable, Riku Katsuragi. His eyes scanned her once, not lustfully, just calculating, like she was an equation he intended to solve. "This is the last time you'll arrive without security," he said simply. Janiola folded her arms. "I didn't realize I was your hostage." He walked past her, crisp and silent. "You're not. You're my insurance." She followed him inside, biting back every instinct to punch him or run. He led her through the house, a masterpiece of steel, black wood, and shadows. Nothing personal, nothing warm, no family photos, no trinkets, no signs of life. "You live here alone?" she asked. "I exist here," he replied. Same thing, she supposed. At dinner, a table set for 6. Only 2 Saturday. Janiola pushed her food around. "Do you always eat in silence? I find small talk inefficient. Maybe you find human connection inconvenient." He finally looked at her, something flickering behind his eyes. "You're not here to connect with me, Janiola. You're here to protect your father. I'm here to protect an empire." "And yet," she said quietly, I'm the one who had to fly halfway across the world to sit beside a man who can't even ask me how I take my tea. He blinked once. You prefer black tea? With no sugar? She stared. I read your file, he said, turning back to his food. That's not the same as caring. No, he agreed. It's not. Late one night, his private office. Alone, Riku stood in front of a massive wall-sized screen projecting financial charts. But he wasn't reading them. He was watching the hallway security feed. And on it, Janiola, wandering through the home, barefoot, hugging her sweater to her chest. She paused at a family portrait he had covered with a black cloth. He didn't know why he hadn't taken it down. Maybe because part of him still feared that forgetting was worse than feeling. He turned off the screen. Meanwhile, in her room, Janiola stared out the window, trying to anchor herself. Her chest ached, not from heartbreak, but from this odd, growing curiosity about the man who had bought her life for a year. He wasn't cruel exactly, just hollow, like someone had carved the soul out of him and replaced it with marble. And yet, she felt the weight of his gaze sometimes, heavy, wordless, unblinking, like he saw things and buried them before they reached his mouth. The next morning, the housekeeper tripped and dropped a porcelain dish near the kitchen. It shattered. Everyone froze. The woman bowed deeply, shaking. Forgive me, Master Riku. But before she could beg further, Riku knelt and began picking up the shards himself. The staff stared. He didn't speak, just moved, methodically, silently. Janiola stood at the doorway, unseen. Her breath caught. Maybe he wasn't heartless. Maybe he was just hiding too much. The Katsuragi King Legal Office, Seoul. The ink was black, the paper crisp, the air frozen. Janiola sat at the head of a long conference table, her name already printed beside his in elegant brushstroke font. Janiola Lawrence Katsuragi. Beside her sat two lawyers, a notary, and Riku, cold, composed, and unreadable in a charcoal suit. The contract was 12 pages long, full of conditions, loophole-proof clauses, and precise language designed to erase any emotional assumption. 12 months, no romantic entanglements, no children, no public scandals, no divorce until the stipulated term. At the end of 1 year, the union would dissolve with quiet mutual consent. Her father is well and alive, and any debt he owes would be cleared. She would walk away with a generous financial settlement and a new identity that Seoul society would not forget in time. She looked up. I'd like a copy, she said coolly. Of course, Riku replied without flinching. It's your signature, after all. When she finally picked up the pen, she hesitated. Not from fear, but clarity. This wasn't love. This wasn't safety. This was survival. She signed. The moment the final seal was pressed, Riku turned to the legal team. That will be all. Everyone stood except the bride. Riku glanced at her once. We leave for Busan in 2 hours. You'll need to change. Busan, she echoed. Our wedding banquet, he said. You didn't think I'd marry you and not introduce you to the Empire. 2 hours later, on the road to Busan. The car was a black Bentley with dark-tinted windows, silence thick between them. Janiola wore a champagne-colored dress selected by Riku's team. Elegant, modest, and expensive. Her curls had been styled into a soft bun, her jewelry minimalist and precise. But the look in her eyes remained defiantly her own. Riku scrolled through business briefs on his tablet without glancing up. I didn't realize arranged marriages came with press releases, she said finally. They do when you're marrying into two of the largest dynasties in Asia. She arched a brow. So this is just for them then? Your empire? He finally looked at her. No, he said. "It's for the ones waiting to see me fail." She studied him for a beat. "And what am I supposed to be in this story? Your insurance policy?" He didn't blink. "You're the woman I married so they'd leave me alone." "Charming," she muttered. But what unsettled her most wasn't his arrogance. It was the strange flicker of something behind his words. Not indifference, but weariness. Like he wasn't just fighting people. He was fighting ghosts. Busan, the wedding banquet. It wasn't a celebration. It was a spectacle. The ballroom was a world of crystal chandeliers, white lilies, gloved servers, and calculated smiles. Politicians, tycoons, royal families in all but name. And in the middle of it all, Janiola stood beside the coldest man in the room, dressed in white satin and steel. Cameras flashed, rumors flew. Some whispered blackmail. Others whispered bastard child from the States. No one said bride with respect. She could feel their eyes, the way they clung to her black skin like she was a stain on something sacred. And yet, Riku didn't flinch. When one chairman whispered to him in Korean, loud enough for her to hear, "Is she the best you could do?" Riku's jaw tightened. Then he looked at Janiola and offered her his hand. For the first time, he touched her in public. No hesitation, no flinching, just fingers laced between hers, firm and silent. "Smile," he whispered. "They'll eat each other alive, wondering why." She did. And for the first time that night, the press stopped whispering. That night, back at the estate, her heels echoed across the marble floors as she walked alone through the grand foyer of the Katsuragi Kang residence. Every step sounded too loud. The staff bowed and quickly disappeared. The house was enormous but empty, like a museum of power with no soul. Her bedroom was on the 3rd floor, far from Riku's. Not that she'd expected otherwise. When she stepped inside, she saw a dress laid out on the bed, another expensive gown, and a note written in perfect black ink. "You'll be accompanying me to a gallery event on Friday. Wear this. Keep the diamond. Riku." She picked up the necklace beside it, a teardrop-shaped stone hanging on silk silver. There was no affection in the note. And yet, something about the detail in it stirred her. Elsewhere in the house, Riku's study, he watched the gallery of press clippings scroll across his monitor. Analysts were already calculating her background, her net worth, her university transcripts. Seoul's society pages had never moved so fast. He could hear them already. What does a woman like that offer the empire? What they didn't know, and never would, was that he hadn't chosen Janiola randomly. He'd seen her once, years ago, speaking at an education summit in New York on behalf of minority scholars. She looked like a woman who belonged to no one, powerful without needing to shout, brilliant without needing permission. He hadn't spoken to her then, but when he needed a name to fill the role of wife, he remembered her, and that terrified him more than anything, because strategy didn't involve memory, or longing, or the fact that when she smiled at the banquet tonight, for just 1 second, his world felt like it wasn't made entirely of stone. Seoul, the gallery night. The flash of cameras lit up the night like a storm. Riku and Janiola stepped out of the car into a corridor of flashing lights and polished ambition. He looked immaculate. Black suit, silver cufflinks, the emblem of 2 dynasties stitched subtly into his tie. His posture was perfect, practiced. Beside him, Janiola walked with quiet confidence, her gown a deep emerald that glowed against her skin. The crowd whispered, again, always, "Is that her? The foreign bride? She's actually beautiful." Beautiful doesn't mean worthy. She heard every word, but held her head higher. Riku's hand brushed lightly against the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. It was an act for the cameras, yet his touch lingered a second longer than necessary. "Smile," he murmured under his breath. "I'm not your puppet," she replied softly. "No," he said, voice lower, "but tonight, you're my weapon." She turned her head slightly toward him, a spark in her eyes. "And what happens when the weapon refuses to be used?" He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. Inside the gallery, music swelled, classical, distant, cold. Paintings lined the walls, art worth more than most lives. Janiola didn't care for the price tags. She was drawn instead to a single piece near the back. A woman painted in gold light, her face turned upward as though looking toward heaven. "She looks free," Janiola said quietly. Riku stood beside her, his tone unreadable. "Freedom is expensive." "Then maybe you're just afraid to pay for it." That was the first time he looked at her like she wasn't part of his plan, but part of his problem, and he liked it. Later in the car, the ride back was silent at first, the kind of silence that hummed with everything unspoken. Finally, Riku broke it. "You shouldn't have spoken to the chairman's wife about the foundation." Janiola turned to him. "Why? Because I'm not allowed to speak unless spoken to?" His eyes flicked toward her. "Because those people twist words for power." "Maybe," she said, "but maybe power only frightens them when it speaks with truth." He exhaled through his nose. She could tell he wasn't used to defiance. Not from employees, not from anyone. "You're not here to prove a point," he said. She folded her arms. "Then what am I here for, Riku?" "To look pretty and silent? Because if that's what you want, you married the wrong woman." His name on her lips made something shift in the air. He noticed it too. "You said my name," he murmured. She frowned. "And?" He looked at her, really looked, for the first time. "You make it sound human." Her heart stumbled, but she refused to let it show. Maybe that's because it is. Katsuragi Estate, that night. When they arrived home, rain had begun to fall. Janiola stepped out of the car without waiting for him, lifting her dress slightly to keep it from the puddles. Riku watched her walk ahead, proud, unyielding, beautiful. The image unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Inside, she turned toward the stairs. "Good night, Mr. Katsuragi." "Wait." His voice stopped her. She turned, one hand on the railing. He hesitated. A rarity. "About earlier," he said slowly. "You embarrassed them, but you also impressed them. They're not used to someone unafraid." She raised an eyebrow. "And what about you? Are you used to it?" He stepped closer, stopping just before her. The air between them thickened. Electric. "I built my life around rules," he said quietly, "and somehow you break every single one without trying. Maybe your rules deserve to be broken." He studied her face, the softness, the fire, the quiet belief that she didn't need his approval to exist, and something dangerous stirred inside him. "Go upstairs," he said finally, but his voice had lost its edge. "Why?" "Because if you stay, I might start questioning the wrong things." Her heart raced. "Maybe you should." For a long moment, they just stared at each other, her breath shallow, his control slipping. Then he turned away first. "Good night, Janiola." Midnight, in his study. Riku stood at the window again, rain streaking down the glass. His reflection looked like a stranger, the man he used to be, now fractured. He thought of her words. "Maybe you're just afraid to pay for it." Freedom, love, truth. He had spent his whole life buying empires, yet he suddenly realized there were things he'd never even tried to own, because he didn't believe he could keep them. Upstairs, Janiola lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her pulse hadn't slowed since their conversation. He confused her, infuriated her, fascinated her. Underneath his arrogance was something raw, a kind of loneliness that matched her own. Maybe that was what made him dangerous, because for the first time since this began, she didn't feel like a woman trapped in a contract. She felt like someone who had just found a man she might actually want to understand. The morning after, Riku was already at the breakfast table when she came down, wearing a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The faint scent of coffee and cedar filled the room. She paused. "You actually eat breakfast?" He looked up from his tablet. "You're late." "Good morning to you, too." She poured herself tea, ignoring his stare. After a long silence, he said, "The chairman invited us to dinner this weekend. Be ready by 6? She nodded, then added quietly, "I'm not your decoration, Riku." He met her gaze. "I'm aware." "Good," she said, standing, "because you might need me to speak again." He didn't respond, but when she walked away, a small, imperceptible smile tugged at his lips. He had spent years building walls that no one could breach. But now, every word she spoke felt like sunlight slipping through a crack, and he was terrified to realize that he wanted it to stay. Morning light, Katsuragi residence. It began subtly. At first, Riku only glanced at her when she wasn't looking. In the early mornings, as she passed by the floor-to-ceiling windows on her way to the kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in that oversized cream sweater she seemed to love, he would pause his morning coffee just to watch the way the sunlight softened around her. She always sang under her breath when she thought she was alone. He never asked what the songs were. He just listened. He told himself it was curiosity, but he was already lying to himself. Later, that week, at the foundation launch, Janiola stood beside him in a simple navy blue sheath dress, speaking to reporters and donors with ease. Her voice was poised, her confidence natural. She didn't cling to his arm. She didn't defer to him. She didn't behave like a woman trying to prove she belonged. She simply was, and that made her unforgettable. One of the board members leaned over and said under his breath, "She's handling them better than your last PR team." Riku didn't respond, but his eyes never left her. Back at the estate, hidden corners. She liked to read in the sunroom when it rained. She would curl up on the chaise with her knees tucked under her, an old novel in hand, and disappear into a world far from this house of rules and shadows. He watched her once from the hallway, unnoticed. Not because he meant to, but because he couldn't stop himself. There was something about her stillness, the way she exhaled peace, even in silence. He had ruled boardrooms, manipulated markets, bought out companies before breakfast. But he had never understood serenity until he saw it sitting in that sunroom with a book in her hand and a piece he couldn't buy. One evening, dinner was quiet, as always, except tonight. He couldn't stop looking at her mouth when she spoke. He noticed how she curled her fingers slightly around the stem of her wine glass, how she always took exactly 3 sips of tea, how she tilted her head when she was amused, even if she didn't smile. She caught him watching her and raised an eyebrow. "Do I have something on my face?" He looked away. "No." "Then why do you keep staring?" "I wasn't," he lied, reaching for his water. She tilted her head again. "You're a terrible liar, Mr. Katsuragi." A pause. "Only when I lie to myself," he murmured without thinking. She blinked, startled by the softness in his voice, but he was already standing. "I have calls to make." Later, in his private office, he poured himself a drink and stood at the window. His father's words echoed from years ago. "Don't let anyone see you. That's how they control you. Women are distraction. Empires don't have room for emotion. Feelings are the crack in the throne." But his eyes, always lately, went back to her, and she was the crack. Meanwhile, Janiola's room. She sensed something had shifted. He was watching her more, carefully, silently, not with lust, but with something more dangerous, something restrained, protective. One morning, she found a box outside her door. Inside was a set of artist's brushes and a hand-bound sketch pad. No note, no explanation. She had mentioned once, during an offhand conversation, that she missed painting, that she used to escape into color when the world became too loud. She never imagined he'd remembered. She never imagined he'd listen. But he had. One day in the elevator door began to close. He caught it at the last second. They stood side by side in the small space, closer than usual, too close. He smelled of cedar and rain. She smelled of vanilla and something faintly floral. The air thickened. He said nothing, but she could feel him looking at her, again. And when their hands brushed, just barely, he didn't pull away. Neither did she. It was late one night when he opened the security footage again. He told himself it was for safety, for protocol, for structure, but he only clicked on the camera that showed the sunroom. And there she was again, asleep this time, curled on the chaise, book resting open on her stomach. The rain tapped softly against the windows, and something cracked inside him. He stared for a long time. Then, for the first time in his adult life, Riku Katsuragi whispered to no one, "You weren't supposed to matter, but now, I don't know how to look away." She thought he was made of cold, distant silence. But what she didn't know was that his silence was watching her, and for the first time in his life, it was beginning to ache. Seoul, the Katsuragi Foundation Gala. The ballroom glimmered with chandeliers and hypocrisy. Every smile in that room had a price. Janiola had learned to see through it. She stood beside Riku at the entrance, her emerald dress flowing like midnight silk, her curls pinned up in a simple chignon that framed her warm skin. The guests looked polished, wealthy, and, in too many cases, insulted by her existence. It didn't surprise her. It was the whispers that stung. She's too bold. Not the right look for the family. Pretty, but wrong blood. Riku heard them too. He didn't react. His expression was composed, cold, as if nothing could touch him. But beneath the marble of his demeanor, something trembled, because every insult they hurled at her, she absorbed and stood taller. The head of the Katsuragi board, his aunt, Lady Naoko, approached with a gracious smile sharper than any blade. "Janiola," she said, voice dripping with polite venom, "you've certainly made an impression on the press." Janiola returned the smile. "Good or bad?" "Controversial," Naoko replied smoothly. "Some say your presence is unusual. Others, that it's refreshing. But I suppose every empire needs a spectacle now and then." Riku's jaw flexed. Janiola didn't look away. "Maybe," she said softly, "but sometimes the spectacle is just the truth no one wanted to see." Naoko blinked. A murmur rippled through the surrounding guests. Janiola didn't lower her voice. "Respectfully, Lady Naoko, I didn't marry to entertain anyone. I married because I made a choice. One I intend to honor, whether this room likes it or not." The older woman's painted smile faltered. "My, you have spirit." "I have dignity," Janiola corrected. "Spirit's just what keeps it alive." Naoko turned to Riku, searching his face for control. "You'll need to keep your wife in line, Taehyun. These gatherings require tact." Riku's voice was calm, but his eyes were steel. "She doesn't need to be kept in line," he said. "She already stands straighter than most of this board ever has." A stunned silence followed. Even the string quartet hesitated mid-song. Naoko's expression hardened. "Careful. You forget who built this empire." "I don't forget," Riku said quietly. "I just don't kneel." Later. That night, back at the estate, Janiola stood on the balcony, arms folded against the cool night breeze. Soul shimmered below, all light and distance. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt it, that quiet gravity he carried. "You didn't have to defend me," she said without turning. "I didn't," he replied. "I defended what I respect." She looked at him then. Really looked. Respect? His eyes met hers, and for once, the frost in them had thawed. "They think I chose you because you were convenient, disposable. But tonight, you reminded them what it looks like to have a spine in a room full of spines for sale." A slow, startled smile tugged at her lips. "You have a way with insults." He stepped closer. That wasn't one. For a long moment, they simply stood there, breathing the same air. Not husband and wife by paper, but man and woman standing on the same battlefield, unmasked. She looked away first. "You shouldn't have to fight your family because of me." His voice was quiet, firm. "I've been fighting them my whole life. You just gave me a reason worth it." Her breath caught. When he reached out, his hand brushed her shoulder. Light, unsure, as though he was still learning what gentleness felt like. Flashback. His father's study. He remembered the last time he had been humiliated in front of family. His father had told him coldly, "You're too much like your mother." She mistook emotion for power. Don't repeat her failure. He had promised himself that day. No emotion, no weakness. And yet, here he was, breaking that vow for a woman who refused to bow. Hours later, she found him sitting at the kitchen counter in rolled-up sleeves, pouring 2 cups of tea. "For peace negotiations?" she teased. He handed her one. "For thanks." "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "You walked into a room of people who wanted to destroy you," he said, "and you didn't flinch. That's extraordinary." She smiled faintly. "I've faced worse." "From who?" Her smile faded. "Life." For the first time, he saw it. The tiredness behind her strength, the weight she carried without complaint. And something in him shifted completely. He had admired her fire, but now he understood her pain. That was when admiration turned into something else, something dangerous. Before she went upstairs, she turned back. "Riku?" He looked up from his cup. "You don't owe me protection." "I know." "Then why do you keep giving it?" He hesitated, his expression unreadable, voice barely above a whisper. "Because I can't stand to watch them try to break what I couldn't build myself." She stared at him, eyes softening. "And what's that?" He met her gaze. A woman who still believes love can be beautiful, even here. Her heart trembled. She didn't answer. But as she left, Riku realized the truth he'd been avoiding. It wasn't admiration anymore. It was the beginning of love. Mourning the Katsuragi Tower. Riku was known for silence in boardrooms. When he spoke, people listened. When he didn't, people feared him more. But lately, silence had a new sound. It wasn't cold. It wasn't distant. It was the sound of him watching her. Janiola had started visiting the Katsuragi Foundation offices 3 times a week. At first, it was simply to fulfill the charity clause in their contract. Appearances, donations, photo ops. But she didn't treat it as an obligation. She treated it like a calling. Within weeks, the Children's Literacy Project, once a PR gimmick, became a thriving education program. The employees began calling her Director Lawrence, even though she never demanded it. Riku noticed everything. The way she knelt to speak to a shy intern, her voice gentle. The way she memorized the janitors' names. The way she smiled like warmth wasn't something rare, but renewable. She made his world. The world of power, concrete, and calculation. Feel alive. One afternoon, his office. He had just finished a call when she walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You didn't have to bring that," he said without looking up. "You say that every time," she replied, setting it beside him, "and yet you still drink it every time." He glanced up, one brow raised. "You're learning my habits." "I'm observant," she said simply. "You taught me that." Their eyes met across the desk. Her calm, his cautious. He was supposed to be reviewing quarterly reports, but instead he asked, "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "This." He gestured between them. The marriage, the name, the noise. She thought for a moment. "No. I only regret not learning sooner that peace has nothing to do with silence." He frowned slightly. "Meaning?" "You're quiet, Riku," she said softly, "but you're not peaceful. You're just lonely in disguise." He didn't move, but her words hit harder than any insult ever had. For a moment, he couldn't look away. And when she left the room, he found himself whispering the one thing he swore he'd never say aloud. "Maybe I don't want peace without her in it." Days later, the quarterly meeting began as every other. Spreadsheets, charts, lies dressed in suits. Riku sat at the head of the long glass table, impassive, hands folded. Janiola had been invited as a courtesy. Her foundation's numbers were now tied to corporate goodwill. But some men in that room didn't understand the word courtesy. Mr. Han, one of the older board members, leaned back in his chair and said with a smug smile, "I must say, Mrs. Katsuragi, you've been quite the distraction for the media. It's refreshing to see you channel your talents somewhere productive." The room chuckled. Janiola kept her expression poised. "My talents?" she asked mildly. "You'll have to be specific, Mr. Han." "I wasn't aware confidence made men nervous." The smile vanished from his face. The other members shifted uncomfortably. Riku stayed silent. At first, he wanted to let her handle it. She always did. But when Mr. Han muttered under his breath, "Pretty faces can only hold power for so long," something inside Riku broke. He slammed his pen onto the table. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. "Say that again," he said quietly. The man froze. Riku's voice dropped lower. "Go on. I want to hear how brave you are when I'm actually listening." "Mr. Katsuragi, Enough!" Riku snapped, standing. "You don't speak about my wife that way." "Not in this room. Not in any room." Silence. Every executive froze. Riku's next words were colder, quieter, but deadlier. "You forget yourself, Han. You sit at this table because I allow it. Cross that line again, and you'll find yourself back where you started, begging for scraps from the empire she's now helping me build." Mr. Han swallowed hard. "Apologies, sir." "Apologize to her." He turned to Janiola, trembling. "Mrs. Katsuragi, forgive my words." She inclined her head, voice calm but strong. "I don't need your apology. I need your respect." Riku looked at her, proud, fierce, and heartbreakingly composed, and realized he'd never admired anyone the way he admired her right now, after the meeting. When the room emptied, Janiola turned to him. "You shouldn't have done that." "I shouldn't have let it go on as long as I did," he countered. "You made enemies today." "I made a statement," she sighed, shaking her head. "You can't fight everyone who disrespects me, Riku." He stepped closer. "Why not? They've spent years worshiping everything false. Power, money, pedigree. And then you walk in and remind them what real looks like." Her heart thudded. Real, unbought, unbroken, unafraid. She tried to look away, but his voice softened. "You don't bend," he said, "and I'm starting to realize I don't want to rule a world that breaks people like you." There was no calculation in his tone, no strategy, just truth. She took a slow breath. "You can't protect me from everyone." He brushed a stray curl from her face. "Maybe not." But I can start with the ones who think they can touch you and still sleep at night." For a heartbeat, the room was utterly still. And for the first time since their contract began, she couldn't tell if his words were part of the performance or if she had just heard a confession. That night, the balcony. The city stretched below, glittering like a sea of stars. He stood beside her, both of them quiet. "Why do you keep standing up for me?" she asked finally. He thought about it. "Because I hate seeing people mistake grace for weakness." "And what if it is weakness?" she asked softly. He turned to her, eyes dark. "Then I'll be weak with you." Her breath caught. She looked away, but he reached out. Not to pull her closer. Not yet. Just to rest his hand gently over hers. For a man who'd built his name on power, the gesture was small. But to her, it felt like an empire shifting. He had always believed love was a liability, but standing beside her now, watching the woman they wanted to break stand unshaken, he understood the truth. The only thing more dangerous than love was trying to live without it. It started with a letter. Janiola hadn't been looking for it. She had only gone into Riku's study to retrieve architectural files for the Foundation's new school wing. But while searching the bottom drawer, she found a thin cream envelope. Her name written in a hand she'd know anywhere. Her father's. Except he wasn't her father. Not by blood. Not by truth. But by the only kind of bond she'd ever known. She hesitated, then opened it. "My dearest Janiola, if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. Your mother once worked for the Katsuragi family, left you something valuable, far too valuable for the Katsuragi bloodline to destroy. I simply found a way to return what was hers. This marriage was the bridge. Don't hate me for using you. I raised you to endure. You'll understand when you see what your name is worth." Her hands began to shake. She read it again, as if it might change, but it didn't. It just kept saying the same terrible thing, that she hadn't married to save him. She'd married to save his ambition. That evening, the door clicked softly. Riku stepped inside, loosening his tie. He froze when he saw her sitting on the floor, the letter trembling in her hands. "Janiola?" he said carefully. "What happened?" She looked up. Her eyes were red, her voice raw. "I found a letter," she whispered, "from the man I thought was my father." He crouched down beside her, taking the letter. His gaze moved line by line, until his jaw tightened. When he looked back at her, his voice was low. "Your mother once held shares in the Katsuragi group," he said slowly. "She hid them before she left Japan. The trust tied them to her direct bloodline." Her breath caught. "Me?" He nodded grimly. "Your guardian. The man you called your father. Must have known. That's why he came to me. He wasn't dying, Janiola. He was dealing." She stared at him, the words like acid in her throat. "I married you to save him," she said, "and he never needed saving." Riku's voice softened. "You were the inheritance, Janiola, and he sold you to me to get back into the Katsuragi line." Her tears finally fell. "So we were both used." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, wiped a tear from her cheek, and said quietly, "Yes, but you're the only thing in this entire world I didn't buy, and the only thing I refuse to lose." Flashback. Janiola, age 12. She remembered sitting by his hospital bed when she was just 12. He had looked so fragile. She had prayed with her little hands clenched together, whispering, "Please let Daddy live." But now she wasn't sure who he had been all along, a guardian or a thief. The next morning, after Janiola's discovery, the boardroom on the 68th floor of Katsuragi Holdings was glass and ice, pristine marble, brushed steel, and silence that could cut bone. But today, the air was different. Today, it vibrated. Executives lined the table, all in dark suits, all avoiding the sharp, looming presence at the head. Riku Katsuragi, heir to 2 dynasties, and, until now, the coldest man in the room. Today, he was fire. He stood with his back to them, hands in his pockets, staring out at the Tokyo skyline. Rain blurred the view. No one dared speak. Then his voice, low and dangerous, filled the room. Who brokered the deal with Janiola Lawrence's guardian? A beat of silence. Then Mr. Anzai, the family legal counsel, cleared his throat. With all due respect, Katsuragi-sama, the deal was reviewed and approved by the legal team under your stepmother's directive. Answer the question. Riku turned around slowly. Who orchestrated the contract marriage? Who knew her father wasn't sick, but used that lie to manipulate her into signing a marriage agreement she never would have entered if she knew the truth? Mr. Anzai hesitated. Beside him, Madame Yun Kyung, Riku's stepmother and interim chair of Kang Global's sole office, finally spoke, voice smooth as oil. You needed stability, Riku. That girl gave you public favor, neutral blood, and no complications. You should be thanking us. You forged medical records. The words cracked like a whip. Gasps rustled across the boardroom. Madame Yun Kyung's painted lips thinned. You had no objection when she signed. Riku stepped closer, his gaze now blade sharp. I didn't object because I was told she was willing. I was told her father was dying, that she needed saving, and I had the means to offer it. He slammed a thin folder onto the table. Janiola's letter from her father. This is what she found last night. This is what you all hid. His voice dropped. You didn't bring me a bride. You sold me a woman's life. Madame Eun Kyung rose to her feet, steel flashing beneath her elegant silk hanbok. You think you love her? She hissed. Do you know how many women would die to be in her place? Do you know what that bloodline has done to ours? Riku didn't blink. I know she's the only person in this empire who didn't want anything from me. And now she has access to our holdings. Because I gave it to her. Gasps again. Shock. Panic. Mr. Anzai nearly choked. You... what? As of this morning, Riku said evenly, my personal shares in both Katsuragi Holdings and Kang Global have been restructured. Janiola Katsuragi is now co-trustee. Any future decisions involving our empire require her signature. Chaos erupted. You've gone mad. This woman is a liability. She's a foreigner, Riku. She's my wife. His voice silenced the room. Then he looked directly at his stepmother. You underestimated her because of her skin, because of her silence, because she didn't come from Seoul or Tokyo or gilded bloodlines. But the woman you tried to use is the only person who ever looked at me and saw a man. Not an heir. A long pause. And that, he added coldly, makes her more qualified to lead this empire than any of you. Later, that night, rooftop garden, Katsuragi Tower. The city glittered beneath the clouds. Janiola stood alone, eyes closed against the wind, trying to find peace in the ruins of the truth. She didn't hear his footsteps, but she felt the warmth when he draped a coat over her shoulders. It's done, Riku said gently. She turned, eyes tired. What do you mean? They know everything. I read them the letter. I told them the deal was over. She laughed faintly without joy. And now what? They'll come for me? He stepped closer. They'll try. But I won't let them touch you. Why? She asked, finally looking him in the eyes. You don't owe me anything. He reached out, brushing a curl from her cheek. I didn't fall in love with you to repay a debt. He held her gaze. I fell in love because somewhere between silence and survival, you made me human. She stared at him. breath trembling. And for the first time, she saw the man, not the empire. Few days later, midnight, the rooftop. She needed air. She walked to the rooftop alone, wrapped in a blanket, staring out over Seoul's sparkling skyline. Everything felt distant, unstable. Riku joined her quietly. No words, just his presence. Steady, certain, silent. I feel like my whole life was a lie, she whispered. Like I gave up everything for a man who was just using me like a pawn. He hesitated. I know what that feels like. She turned toward him, surprised. Do you? He nodded slowly. I was raised as a legacy, not a son. My mother loved me, but she died too early. My father, he shaped me into a weapon, not a person. She blinked. Then why didn't you tell me that before? Because I didn't think I needed to share anything with you, he said softly. You were supposed to be a stranger. A convenience, nothing more. Her chest tightened. He stepped closer, voice trembling slightly. Rare for him. But now I find myself wanting to tell you everything. And I hate that you're hurting. I hate that I didn't see this coming. She swallowed. You don't have to carry this too. He looked at her, eyes dark with emotion. I want to. Her breath hitched. And then, for the first time, he reached for her hand and simply held it. Not possessively, not to claim, but to say, I'm still here. Later. That night, Janiola stood by the window, arms crossed as the rain started to fall. The soft patter echoed through the room. He stepped into the doorway. I've already launched an investigation into the shares, Riku said quietly. If your father forged anything... I don't care about the shares, she interrupted. I just wanted one person in my life to choose me without an agenda. He didn't move. Would it make a difference, he asked, if I said that now, I do? She turned toward him, eyes filled with a new kind of fear. Do what? Choose you. Her breath caught. No contracts, no legacy, no family war, he said. Just me. She stared at him for a long moment. You're only saying that because you feel guilty. I'm saying it because I'm in love with the woman they all tried to use but couldn't break. His voice was raw. Because I can't breathe when I see you hurting. The silence stretched. And then, she whispered, I'm scared I want to believe you. Then believe me, he said gently. Just this once. Later, alone, she looked in the mirror and saw a woman she almost didn't recognize. Not broken, not helpless, but rising from the ruins. Maybe love didn't come from the ones who raised you. Maybe it came from the one who saw you clearly and stayed. She married him to save a man who never loved her, but somehow the man who wasn't supposed to love her at all was the only one who truly saw her worth. The house felt too large, too quiet. Janiola stood at the edge of the walk-in closet, suitcase half filled. Her movements were slow, but deliberate, the kind that came from a soul still stunned, but no longer in denial. She had spent her life sacrificing for people, for her father, or the man she believed was her father, for this marriage, for an image she was never meant to uphold. And now, she was done. When Riku appeared in the doorway, dressed for the office but eyes darker than usual, she didn't look up. You're leaving, he said, not asking. She zipped the suitcase slowly. I need space. He nodded once. For how long? I don't know. He stepped inside, voice low. Janiola? I can't do this, Riku, she interrupted gently, not harshly. Not right now. I can't keep choosing everyone but myself. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded a blouse. I gave up everything, she continued, to save a man who never really existed. I came here thinking I was doing something noble, that this marriage was the cost of my father's life, but it wasn't. It was all a game, and I was just the prize. You weren't a prize to me, he said firmly. Not anymore. Her eyes lifted to his. But I'm still the pawn. That hasn't changed. He didn't argue, and that hurt her more than 1,000 raised voices could have. The next day, it was raining again. Of course it was. Riku stood under the front awning of the estate, watching as she handed her suitcase to the driver. She didn't want a security escort. She didn't want a destination. She just wanted air, a life, something that didn't feel like a negotiation. She turned to face him one last time, umbrella resting loosely at her side. I need to remember who I was before I became your wife, she said softly, before I was someone else's pawn. He didn't stop her, not even when she hoped he would. He just nodded. I understand. That was all. No pleas, no demands, just the sound of his heart quietly breaking. That night, the silence was heavier than it had ever been. Riku sat in his study, lights off, her tea mug still on the table. He had let her go, not because he didn't love her, but because he did. Because real love didn't cage a woman who had spent her whole life locked in someone else's plan. And yet, every hour she was gone felt like a hole growing deeper in his chest. Meanwhile, Janiola's hotel room. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the rain tapping on the window, her coat still on. She hadn't even unpacked. Freedom tasted strange, like guilt, like grief, like a part of her still standing in that marble hallway, hoping, praying. He would have stopped her, but he hadn't. And somehow, that made her want him even more. Because the only man who had ever claimed her without truly owning her was the one who let her go when she asked for air. She stared down at her phone. No messages, no calls. She both hated and admired him for it. Flashback, the moment before the break. She remembered the night after she discovered the truth about her father. She'd sat on the kitchen counter, barefoot, crying softly into a tea towel. Riku had entered. He didn't ask questions, he didn't touch her. He just sat across from her and said quietly, "I'll sit here until the ache in your chest doesn't feel like it's swallowing you whole." She had said nothing, but his presence had been the first thing that made her feel human in days. And now he was gone from her again, this time because she asked him to be. Midnight, Riku stepped into her sunroom, the place where she read, the place where she disappeared. He walked over to her chair, sat down slowly, and for the first time, whispered aloud in the empty house, "I let you go, Janiola, but I never stopped needing you here." Janiola lay back on the bed, phone clutched in hand. Riku sat alone on the chaise she used to read on. Neither called, neither slept, but both hearts whispered the same thing into the silence. Come back? She left to find herself. He let her go to prove he never owned her. But love, real love, doesn't disappear when someone walks away. It waits, and sometimes it follows. Started one evening, Janiola's hotel lobby. The sky over Seoul was the color of bruised plum. Thick clouds curled around the tops of the skyscrapers like smoke. Janiola stood in the hotel lobby, umbrella tucked under her arm, waiting for the rain to ease. She had just returned from a quiet meeting with an old friend from the foundation, hoping the rhythm of normal life would distract her from the hollow ache in her chest. It hadn't. The concierge waved her over. "Miss Lawrence, someone dropped this off for you." A letter. No name. No return address. Just a gold wax seal pressed into the flap. She opened it slowly, expecting, she didn't know what. Maybe another false apology from her father. Maybe silence inside the envelope. Something fitting for how she felt. But instead, the words inside chilled her. You thought you could walk away from what you were given, but what belongs to the legacy cannot be taken by choice. Meet me at the plaza where your mother once fought for her shares, or the truth dies with you just like it did with her." She froze. There was no signature, but the handwriting, old, deliberate, was familiar. Too familiar. It wasn't her father. It was someone connected to the secret he'd buried, someone who still believed she was a possession. 30 minutes later, the plaza. The rain turned violent as she reached the plaza, her coat already soaked. It was deserted. Gray stone, wet pavement, a single flickering light above a shuttered cafe. And then, footsteps. A man emerged from the alley. Late 40s, broad shoulders, a face that reeked of greed and old grudges. "You're her daughter," he said. "That makes you mine." "I'm not yours," Janiola said calmly, "and I don't belong to anyone." He smirked. "But your shares do." She tried to back away, but he grabbed her wrist. Hard. She gasped, twisting, trying to free herself. "You're not going to scream?" he taunted. "I don't need to scream." He raised a hand to strike her. Then a voice thundered from behind. "Let her go." The man barely had time to turn before Riku was on him. He wasn't wearing a suit tonight. Just a black coat, rain-soaked, and rage in his eyes. He didn't speak again. He simply grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him against the brick wall. Janiola staggered back, breathing hard, heart racing. The man shouted, trying to swing back, but Riku was faster, more precise. Every move was brutal, controlled. He wasn't just angry, he was furious. This wasn't about contracts or dynasties. This was personal. The man collapsed, groaning, clutching his ribs. Riku stood over him, chest rising and falling with fury. "If you ever look in her direction again, I will bury every part of you the law doesn't reach. Do you understand me?" The man crawled away, disappearing into the shadows like the coward he was. And then, stillness. Only the rain remained. Janiola was still standing in the same spot, trembling. He turned to her. His eyes softened instantly. "You're shaking," he murmured, pulling off his coat and draping it around her shoulders. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. "Come here," he whispered. She didn't resist. He pulled her into his arms, not carefully, not cautiously, just fully, completely. Her body folded into his like a key finding its lock. The rain fell in sheets, but neither of them moved. "You were never meant to be hurt," he whispered, voice raw. "Not by anyone, not even me." Her eyes stung. "I didn't think you'd come." "I always come," he said. "You just haven't let yourself need me until now." She closed her eyes against his chest, letting the sound of his heartbeat silence the storm outside. And inside her, something shifted. This man, the one who once vowed never to love, had come running, raging, breaking for her. Later, he brought her home. Not to a hotel, not to a guest room, but home. Wrapped in blankets, she sat on the couch near the fire. He knelt in front of her, drying her hands with a towel, gently, reverently, as if she were something sacred. "I should have kept you closer," he murmured. She shook her head. "You let me go because you respected me." "I let you go because I didn't know if I deserved you." Her breath caught. "And now?" she asked. He looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "Now I know I don't. But I'll fight every day to be the man who does." A tear slipped down her cheek. He wiped it away with his thumb, then kissed her hand, slowly, with no demand behind it. Just the truth. The storm had come to steal her peace, but love, wild, relentless, and steady, came running after her. And this time, She didn't run from it. Morning, Katsuragi Group headquarters, Seoul. The entire board had gathered. A quarterly shareholders meeting, the kind Riku usually conducted with a few sharp words, a signature, and silence. But today, every executive, every investor, and every power-hungry member of the Katsuragi Kang legacy was seated with sharpened interest, because rumors were swirling about his wife, about his rage, about the man he nearly sent to the hospital for touching her, and most of all, about the contract. Riku walked into the room wearing black, no tie, no smile. Beside him, Janiola. She wore a sleek cream dress that hugged her frame like armor. Her head held high, eyes forward. Some gawked, some sneered. Others, the ones smart enough, stayed silent. She walked like a queen who didn't ask for a crown, but wore it anyway. Chairman Min cleared his throat, eyes flicking toward Janiola. Mr. Katsuragi, I hope we can address the matter of the marriage agreement discreetly. Some of us feel— You feel, Riku interrupted calmly, entitled to opinions about my personal life. The chairman stiffened. When your personal life affects global brand perception, yes. Then let me clear up any confusion. Riku pulled a leather folder from the inside of his blazer and dropped it onto the center of the polished glass table. The marriage contract, 12 pages, signed, stamped, legally binding. He opened it slowly, looked at it once, then tore it straight down the middle. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. He didn't stop. He ripped the contract again and again, until it was nothing but paper scraps on the table. Then he turned, took Janiola's hand in his, and spoke clearly. For every voice recorder, every shareholder, every doubter. She's not here on paper, he said. She's here because I chose her. Silence. Riku looked at them one by one. Men who feared risk more than regret. You wanted to know what this marriage is. I'll tell you. It was a contract. Now it's a commitment. No rules. No expiration. No more pretending. He turned to Janiola, and she saw it. The truth in his eyes. The fear. The strength. The choice. I'm done with deals that keep me safe but make me empty, he said. You were never a strategy, Janiola. You're the piece I never thought I could deserve. Her heart nearly gave out. Because he didn't say it to impress the room. He said it to her. Flashback, their first night after the contract. She remembered how quiet he had been that first week. How he'd never touched her unless required by cameras. How he only looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. He never intended to love her. And now, here he was, shredding his own rules, declaring her his truth. After the meeting, they stood in the empty hallway outside the boardroom, echoes of murmurs still behind the frosted glass. You just destroyed a legal contract in front of 10 billionaires, she whispered. He nodded. I should have done it the day you walked into my world. She touched his chest lightly, right over his heart. You said I was your piece. What if I can't always be that? You already are, he said, even when you're angry, even when you walk away, because I don't need perfection. I just need you. Tears burned at her eyes. And if the world turns on us? She asked quietly. Let it, he murmured. I didn't fall in love with the world. I fell in love with you. That night, he didn't go to his study. He didn't lock himself behind screens and walls. He walked into her bedroom and stood at the door. I know we didn't do this the right way, he said, and I can't change how we began. But I want a new beginning, one where you're not obligated to be here, one where you want to be. She walked toward him slowly. You really think we can just rewrite our story? He stepped in, gently taking her hand. No, but maybe We can turn the contract into a covenant. He raised her hand to his lips. And this time, it's not a transaction, he said softly. It's a vow. She didn't speak for a moment, just stared at him, this man who once guarded his soul like a vault and now stood bare before her. I wanted to be seen, she whispered, not owned, not tolerated, not saved, just seen. He touched her cheek. Then look at me now, because everything I have, everything I am, is yours, Janiola. Her lips trembled, and then she kissed him. Not because the contract demanded it, not because the cameras were rolling, but because this was finally love, real, messy, free. He built a life of control. She was never part of the plan, but now she was the plan. No more rules, no more pretending, just love, loud, steady, and completely real. Morning, Kang Group headquarters, Seoul. The boardroom was full, but the tension made it feel like a battlefield. Riku sat at the head of the table, as always, but the atmosphere had changed. Gone was the respect veiled in fear. Today, that fear had curdled into hostility. At his left, his uncle, Kang Min-soo, the temporary chairman of the Korean half of the family dynasty. At his right, legal counsel, and across the room, the elders, executives, the old blood. A printed image sat in the center of the table, grainy but damning. A photo of Riku tearing the contract. A headline, Riku Katsuragi Kong publicly declares contract wife his real bride. Dynasty in crisis? They weren't angry because he loved her. They were angry because he said it out loud. Have you lost your mind? Min-soo spat. Do you understand what you've done? That contract was the only thing holding our investors back from questioning the entire merger. Riku leaned back, then let them question it. His uncle stood. You're choosing her? Over the future of this entire bloodline? Riku's tone didn't rise, but his eyes burned with something sharper than fury. I'm choosing what none of you ever had the courage to... something real. Meanwhile, back in Japan, the Katsuragi board met in emergency session. 3 key investors called for a vote of confidence. The old guard stirred restlessly. His Japanese aunt, Madame Katsuragi, spoke in clipped syllables. He has broken the image, the structure, the tradition. We gave him everything, and he throws it away for a foreign girl with nothing but a last name borrowed from a man who isn't even her father. The room nodded, until someone whispered, and yet, the stock hasn't fallen. Silence, because the truth was, Riku's public declaration had inspired a wave of interest from younger investors, new demographics, even social media. They couldn't ignore it, but they could still try to control him. They sent a message, revoke the marriage or relinquish your position. Back in Seoul, the ultimatum. Janiola found the letter first, tucked between Riku's folders. A formal statement. Effective immediately, the board demands you dissolve your current marriage for the sake of preserving harmony within the Katsuragi Kang legacy. She stared at the paper. Her stomach churned. She wasn't surprised, but she was still stunned. That afternoon, she stood by the terrace when Riku returned from the meeting. She held the letter out without a word. He took it, didn't flinch. They're giving you a choice, she said, voice barely audible. You can keep your throne, or keep me. He didn't hesitate. I choose you. Flashback. His childhood. He remembered watching his mother sit at the edge of her vanity, hands trembling, face flawless but hollow. I married for peace, she'd whispered once, but peace isn't the same as love. He had been 10 years old, and that day, he decided he'd never let love make him weak. But now he understood. Love wasn't weakness, it was war. and he was ready to fight for it. That evening, he called a press conference. No advisors, no PR spin, just him. The world watched. Korea, Japan, Wall Street. He stepped up to the podium in a crisp suit, alone, no notes. "My name is Riku Katsuragi Kang," he said, "heir to two of the most powerful dynasties in Asia. For years, I've been told who to be, what to feel, who to marry, and for a while, I obeyed." He looked straight into the camera. "But I will not sacrifice the woman I love to preserve a lie," gasps. "I married Janiola Lawrence under a contract. That's true, but it stopped being a contract the moment I fell in love with her. She didn't ask me to walk away from anything, but I am." He removed the signet ring from his right hand, the ring that symbolized his position in the family council, and placed it on the podium. "If choosing her means walking away from it all, then I'll walk." He turned and walked off the stage. The room exploded behind him, but he didn't look back. That night, the air was still. Riku stood in front of Janiola in the courtyard. No more suits, no titles, just the man she had seen underneath all along. "You gave up your empire," she whispered, "for me." He shook his head slowly. "No, I gave up the illusion of one. The real empire starts now, with you." A tear slipped down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb. "Say something." She stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his. "You walked away from everything you were born into," she whispered, "for everything I want to build with you." Her lips found his, slow and aching. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a vow. The bloodlines could keep their legacies. He had found something far more powerful, a love that burned through the lies of dynasty and built something eternal in its place. Seoul, late morning. The city was buzzing. For weeks, tabloids and investors alike had obsessed over Riku's bold resignation from the Katsuragi Kang board. He had walked away from titles, privileges, and blood-backed seats at billion-dollar tables. But today, the buzz was about something else. The news went public that the man who once vowed never to love had transferred power to his wife. At home, the moment it happened, the living room was filled with documents and silence. Janiola sat on the couch, blinking at the legal file in her lap. Her name was on the front. Janiola Lawrence Katsuragi, sole beneficiary and controlling stakeholder. She looked up slowly. "Riku, is this what I think it is?" He stood across from her, hands in his pockets, eyes soft but steady. "It's not symbolic. It's not temporary." She opened the folder. Inside were signed forms, notarized by International Council. He had just transferred 30% of his private shares, not to a trust, not to a holding firm, but to her. She stared at him. "You don't do things halfway, do you?" He walked to her slowly, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "I've spent my life building walls and wearing crowns, but none of them made me feel safe. Not like you do." She searched his face. "You're really giving this to me." "I'm not giving it," he whispered. "I'm entrusting it." She blinked rapidly. "And what do you want in return?" He smiled, just a little. "Just you. No contracts, no silence, no distance." Her heart cracked open again, wider this time, and quietly, reverently, she whispered, "Then I accept." Flashback, her mother's words. She remembered her mother's voice in childhood, strong, sure. "A man who truly loves you will not just protect you. He will prepare you. He will position you beside him, not behind." And now, here she stood. Not a token, not an accessory, but a woman entrusted to carry his name, his future. The gala. That night. They arrived together just after sunset. The ballroom was filled with the world's elite. Diplomats, CEOs, tech titans, celebrity heirs. But no one could take their eyes off her. Janiola entered in a custom black and gold gown that shimmered with grace. She didn't need a title. She wore power naturally, effortlessly. Riku walked beside her, hand resting lightly on her lower back. He wore no tie, no board pin, no family crest. Just her, and for the first time in public, he smiled, a real smile. Not polite, not restrained. The kind of smile that made people stop and ask, "Who is this woman?" Because only she could melt a man like that. Later, a journalist approached cautiously near the garden terrace. "Mr. Katsuragi," she asked, "how do you respond to critics who say you gave your power away too soon?" He looked at Janiola. She stood a few steps away, laughing with an ambassador's wife, regal and warm. He turned back to the reporter. "I didn't give it away," he said. "I gave it to the one person who sees the world not as an empire to control, but as a place to heal." He smiled again. "That's the future I believe in." Later, that night, on the balcony, they stood outside together, city lights beneath them. Music floated behind them, muffled by glass. "You didn't have to give me anything," she said softly, tracing the edge of his cuff. "I didn't," he said. "I wanted to," she smiled. "Then let me give you something back." He arched a brow. "What?" She leaned in and kissed him. But this kiss wasn't desperate. It wasn't to prove anything. It was simply home. He gave her more than power. He gave her a place beside him. And for the first time, the world didn't just see her as his wife. They saw her as the woman he trusted to carry what once belonged to kings. His name, his legacy, his heart. Riku stood in the sunroom, hands in his pockets, watching the rain slip down the windows like time refusing to be erased. Janiola was in the next room, curled up with a journal, humming softly to herself. She had no idea what today marked. But he remembered. It was the anniversary of the day he buried the last person who had ever told him, "You are enough," his mother. And as the rain fell, so did the walls he'd built to keep her loss from swallowing him whole. Flashback. Kyoto, age 10. The house was quiet that day, too quiet. Riku had crept into the hallway, holding the drawing he had made for her. A crooked sun, a messy cherry blossom tree, and a little boy standing beside a woman with a golden crown. He had drawn her as a queen. But when he entered her bedroom, he found her sitting at the edge of the bed, clutching a letter. Her hands trembled. "It's from your father," she said, not turning around. "He's refusing to acknowledge the Katsuragi shares again. He says he married me, not my birthright." Riku stepped closer. "Mama?" She turned finally, and the sadness in her smile would stay with him for decades. "You're too much like me," she whispered. "That scares him." Later. That year, they buried her with chrysanthemums and silence. His father didn't speak at the service. He didn't even cry. Neither did Riku. He had learned in that moment, love disappears, and silence keeps you strong. So he became what the legacy demanded. Not a boy, not a son, an heir. Present day with Janiola. He walked into the room, finding her exactly as he knew she'd be. Reading, soft music playing in the background, her natural curls falling over one shoulder like poetry written in defiance of this cold world. "You're quiet," she said, looking up. "That kind of quiet I've learned to pay attention to." He sat beside her, not speaking. She watched him for a long beat. "Talk to me," she said gently. "Not as the man who owns empires, just as the man who's holding something in. He exhaled, and then, slowly, he began to speak. My mother was Katsuragi born, regal, brilliant, but marrying into the Kang family cost her everything, even her voice. Janiola stayed quiet, letting him unfold the memories like brittle pages from a book too long sealed shut. She used to sing to me when I couldn't sleep. She told me I didn't have to be like them. But she died. And after that, no one told me I had choices. He looked at her then, eyes darker than usual, but softer. Until you. Her throat tightened. Riku, you didn't tell me I could feel. You just let me. Every time you challenged me, every time you refused to shrink, you were showing me what love could be if it wasn't a transaction. His voice broke slightly, and that terrified me, because I was taught love would kill a legacy, that it would make me weak, that no woman would ever stay unless I offered power or protection. She reached out and touched his hand, and now, I've never felt stronger than when I'm standing beside you, he whispered. Flashback, before the contract. He had seen her once, from a distance, speaking at a charity summit in New York. She wasn't famous. She wasn't loud. But she had spoken with a passion that made him stop walking, and he'd whispered to himself, that kind of woman could bring down a dynasty just by refusing to apologize for being good. He never approached her that day, but he remembered. And months later, when he needed a name to sign a contract, hers came first. He hadn't realized it then, but maybe he had been reaching for her even before he understood why. Later that evening, Janiola slipped into the study and found Riku at his desk, head bowed over an old photo of his mother. She walked up behind him and placed her hands on his shoulders. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. You didn't ask, he murmured. You just saw I needed it. That's what love does. He looked up at her. Is that what this is? Her lips curved. Riku Katsuragi, you have dismantled 2 dynasties, walked away from thrones, and given me your future. If this isn't love, I don't know what is. His eyes locked on hers. And you? He asked. When did you fall for me? She leaned down and kissed his forehead, somewhere between your silence and the moment you let me stay anyway. He had sworn never to love, because love once meant loss. But in her arms, love became healing, and the man who built his life on distance had finally come home. Early morning, Jeju Island. The air was thick with salt and stillness. Waves rolled in quietly along the shore, and plum blossoms stirred in the gentle breeze. The sun had just begun to climb over the horizon, brushing the world in soft gold. Janiola stepped out onto the villa terrace barefoot, her robe tied loosely, a cup of tea warm between her hands. Everything was peaceful, but inside her heart, something stirred, something unfamiliar and quiet. Contentment. Some nights ago, Riku had come into her room with no fanfare, no suits, no speech, just him. He sat beside her on the floor where she was sketching ideas for the Foundation's youth center. I've been thinking, he said. She glanced at him, amused. That usually leads to danger or paperwork. This time, it leads to something else. He pulled something from his pocket. Not a diamond, not a custom box, just a velvet pouch. She opened it slowly. Inside, a simple platinum ring. No embellishment. Just a small engraving on the inside. No rules. Just love. Her throat tightened. No cameras, he said softly. No dynasty. No shareholders. No scripts. Her eyes shimmered. He reached for her hand. You married me once to survive, he whispered, but I'm asking now, with nothing but this moment to offer you, will you marry me again? Her voice broke as she whispered, yes, He kissed her palm and pulled her into his arms. Not a rescue, not a rebellion, just love, pure and steady. Present, Jeju Beach. The wedding wasn't planned. It wasn't announced. It wasn't designed for guests or grandeur. It was for them. A white linen arch had been placed in the sand by a few trusted staff members who understood what sacred looked like. Janiola wore a cream silk dress, no train, no veil. Her curls were free, her eyes bright with something only time and tenderness could have written. Riku stood barefoot in a light gray linen shirt and slacks, waiting as she walked toward him. There was no music, just the sea and them. They didn't recite anything rehearsed. They didn't need to. He took her hands and said quietly, "You were never supposed to matter. You were never part of the plan, but you became the reason I tore every plan apart." Her eyes filled. "And you were never what I prayed for," she whispered, "but somehow you became my answer." He smiled, not the tight, polite one the world once knew, but the kind that told her, "You are the home I never had the courage to build." "I don't want a perfect life," he said. "I just want you in every version of mine." She stepped closer. "Then let this be the version where we stop surviving and start living." No efficient, no grand pronouncements, just hands intertwined. Promises exchanged beneath the open sky. And when he slipped the ring onto her finger, the simple one, with no rules, just love etched inside, she felt it. This was the vow that counted. Not because it was witnessed, but because it was true. That night, they danced on the rooftop under fairy lights and stars. No music, just his hands on her waist, her head on his shoulder. "I feel like I can finally exhale," she whispered. "You've been holding your breath for too long," he murmured. "Let this be the life where you breathe freely." She looked up at him. "What about the world?" "I let them talk," he said, "but I don't let them in anymore. Only you." She kissed him then. Slow, sure, sweet. And it tasted like everything she thought she'd lost, finally finding its way home. He didn't need empires. She didn't need saving. Together, they built something neither of them had known before. A love not born out of necessity, but of choice. Seoul, 3 years later. The world had changed, not because of stock numbers or press headlines, but because one woman, once chosen for her silence, had chosen instead to speak. Janiola Lawrence Katsuragi stood on the steps of the newly merged Katsuragi Kong Foundation, now headquartered in Seoul, her voice calm and steady as she addressed a crowd of journalists, students, and officials from both Korea and Japan. Behind her, the banner read, "Education, Equity, Healing." Her natural curls danced in the breeze, and a soft blush-pink suit hugged her frame. She no longer looked like a foreigner or a pawn. She looked like a woman born to lead. "To every girl who has been told she is too different to belong," she said into the microphone, "let today remind you, you don't need permission to be powerful. You don't need approval to be whole." Applause. Riku stood at the edge of the platform, hands folded. No tie, no speech prepared. Just watching her, with awe. Because the woman the world once whispered about? Now they listened to her. They followed her. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She was his heir in every way that mattered. Just weeks earlier, they had stood together in the nursery, sunlight pouring through the window. Riku rocked their newborn daughter gently in his arms, their first child, a girl with almond brown eyes and a kiss of quiet strength even in sleep. "She's going to break dynasties with her smile," Janiola had whispered, "and rebuild them with your fire," he said. They had named her Aiko Grace, beloved Grace, a child born not from survival, but from covenant. That afternoon, at the foundation courtyard. Later that day, Janiola sat on a bench beneath the cherry blossoms in full bloom, their soft petals falling like confetti from heaven. Their daughter toddled through the grass, chubby legs carrying her toward a butterfly with fearless joy. Janiola laughed, that deep, unfiltered laugh that still made Riku's heart ache with reverence. He sat beside her, one arm sliding around her shoulders as the wind picked up. "Remember when I thought love was a liability?" he murmured. She leaned into him, still watching Aiko. "You thought I was a liability." He smiled. "You were." She arched a brow. He kissed her temple. A beautiful, soul-altering, heartbreaking, legacy-shattering liability. That turned out to be my greatest asset. She shook her head with a grin, wiping a tear. "You're ridiculous." "And hopelessly in love," he added. She turned toward him fully then, her hand resting on his cheek. "You've changed." "No," he said, eyes shining. "You changed me." He watched their daughter stumble, giggle, then run again under the pink blossoms, light falling all around her like promise. Then he whispered, almost broken by the weight of truth, "I thought I was saving you, but you were saving me." She laid her head on his shoulder, and for a long time, they said nothing else. They just held hands as their child danced through the falling petals. No boardrooms, no press, no contracts, just a man who once ruled in silence, and a woman who taught him how to live with love. The contract brought them together. The world tried to break them apart. But love, beautiful, costly, and true, made them whole again, not as heirs, not as titles, but as two souls, walking side by side beneath the blossoms, building a kingdom of their own. 5 years later, Kyoto, spring morning. The Katsuragi Kong summer estate had been quiet for weeks. Just the three of them. It was here, where his mother once grew plum trees, where silence used to sting, that Riku now found peace. And today, while Janiola and little Aiko played beneath the cherry blossoms, he sat at the old writing desk his mother once used and wrote a letter for his daughter to read when she was older. "Dear Aiko Grace, by the time you read this, I hope you know how deeply you are loved. Not for what you do or what you inherit, but simply because you are. I spent most of my life in silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that buries the truth, that tells you love is dangerous, softness is weakness, and duty is worth more than joy. I believed those things once, until your mother came. She didn't rescue me. She didn't need to. She simply was. Strong enough to confront dynasties, gentle enough to hold my shame without judgment, and bold enough to stay when I gave her every reason to walk. She taught me that love doesn't destroy power. It redefines it. And when you were born, little one, I saw her strength all over again. In your laugh, your stubborn will, your way of holding my hand like you already knew the world would try to take me from you. It won't, because I am not the man I was. I am not the empire. I am yours. So when you grow up, and they tell you who you should be, how you should walk, or what a Katsuragi woman must look like, remember this: you are not a legacy. You are the miracle that proved legacy can be rewritten. And when you fall in love one day, if you choose to, don't settle for someone who hands you a crown. Wait for the one who kneels beside you, offers you peace, and says, "Let's build one together." Just like your mother did for me. Always yours, Appa. Janiola walked in, barefoot and smiling, Aiko giggling at her heels. Riku folded the letter carefully, sealed it in a linen envelope, and placed it in the wooden chest they only used for treasures. Things that couldn't be bought, only lived. Then he stood, wrapped an arm around his wife, and kissed his daughter on the forehead. Beneath the cherry blossoms they stood, a man once lost in silence, a woman who never let it define her, and the child who carried both of their freedom. Some people inherit empires, others inherit names, but Aiko Grace inherited something greater, a love that conquered legacy and a home built with open hands and forever hearts. The end.